There are a great many cities on this planet of ours. One of them is Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina. For many cities, we do not know when they were established, who built them, or for what purpose. Today, they are the silent witnesses of history. What kind of history and what kind of time, we do not know, nor shall we ever find out. What are the associations that spring to mind at the mention of the name of our city? Sarajevo. 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 The development of Sarajevo begins in the middle of the 15th century. The founder of Sarajevo, Isa-bey Ishakovic, founded this city without digging a single trench or building a single defense wall. The first thing he built was a mosque in honor of Tsar Mehmed II el-Fatih, and next, the administrative center, the castle Saray, that Sarajevo was named after. At that time, the building of Winchester Cathedral was completed, and the building of the Pitti Palace in Florence had begun. Leonardo da Vinci was an apprentice in Verrocchi. The construction of the mosque of Sultan Muhammad II in Istanbul was underway. Having decided that the medieval village of Brodac, situated near today's public baths at Ben Basha, was a convenient place to establish a city, Isa-bey first built a tekia, or Muslim monastery there, and next to it a musafirhana, or hostel. Many enjoyed free lodging and food at the hostel for 3 days, time enough to sort themselves out. Some distance down the river, at Bashcharshia, Isa-bey built the Han, or hotel, Kolobara. This Han, along with the many shops built around it, set the economic foundation for the development of the city. It is here that a line, geographically invisible, yet firmly established in terms of history, divides east and west. Two civilizations meet here, though there are no boundaries between them. This is a city closed off on all sides by mountain ranges, plunged into a valley divided into two unequal parts by the river Miljacka, as if cut by a divine sword. It is difficult to talk about any city, and especially one's own. It is impossible to cover everything because everything is important, and it is easy to leave something out because it may seem unimportant, but only to the speaker. One person would always add something while another would omit something else. If you decide to move along a timeline, you run the risk of never completing your description. A solution that comes to the rescue is a journey down the river, because everything revolves around it, in any case. The city spans to the left and right of the river. It seemed to many that the river Miljacka was not worthy of the city of Sarajevo. Someone once said with a sneer that there was not a smaller river with a greater number of bridges. But the river, though small, was often vigorous, as in 1881 when it flooded most of the city. In the 16th century, up the river from Brodac, where the formation of Sarajevo began, Kozja Čuprija, or Goat's Bridge, was built. We do not know much about it, but it is certain that everything came across this bridge: armies, caravans, religions, cultures, and influences. This was a place to welcome people and to see them off. There are two legends about Goat's Bridge. One says that the bridge was built by the Romans, and the other that Mehmed Pasha built it as a reminder of the time when, as a poor boy, he tended his goats there. He noticed that one of his goats kept trying to dig something up from under a rock. At that place, he found a buried treasure. He used it to pay for his education and managed finally to attain the position of Pasha. He built a bridge that he named Goat's Bridge. During the 15th and 16th centuries, over 100 mosques were built in Sarajevo. The most prominent in their beauty are Ferhadiya, Ali Pasha's, and Bey's mosques. All the mosques of Sarajevo, apart from a spiritual role, had a cultural and educational role, and they represented the centers of residential districts containing 5 or 6 streets. The golden age of the city is forever marked by Gazi Husrev Bey, the conqueror of Belgrade, an irreplaceable warrior in the raids on Suleiman, the Magnificent, and 3-time regent and builder of Bosnia. In 1530, on the right bank of Miljacka, he funded construction of the most monumental building of Islamic architecture in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Gazi Husrev Bey's Mosque, a project of the leading Istanbul architect at that time, the Persian Ajem Esir Ali. There aren't many folk legends about Gazi Husrev Bey because he is beyond doubt one of the most important figures in the city's history. He was far too famous to have legends bother with his identity and accomplishments. In 1537, taking after the medresas, or Muslim religious secondary schools of Istanbul, he had a medresa with a library built in honor of his mother, the Sultaness Seljuka. Sarajevans call this building Kurşumlia because it is covered with lead, or kurşum. Not far from the Bey's Mosque, on the spot where the founder of Sarajevo, Isa-bey, had built the first mosque that was burned down by Vuk Gligorovic in 1480, a new Tsar's mosque was built 86 years later. Even today, people talk about how Husrev Bey built a larger mosque for the Tsar and a smaller one for himself. The Tsar could not come to Sarajevo, but having learned from the bad experiences of his predecessors, he sent word that he would take the mosque the builder had intended for himself. There is something fishy about this story because we know that the Bey's Mosque was built in 1530 and the Tsar's 36 years later. At the beginning of the 17th century, right next to the mosque, the Sahat Kula, or clock tower, was built. At that time, very few people owned a clock, so it was an important time orientation device for religious Muslims, who prayed 5 times a day at certain hours. Right next to the Bey's Mosque is the old Christian Orthodox Church. The exact year it was built is not certain, but we do know that it is one of the oldest sacral monuments of the city. When history does not know the answer, the people tell stories. According to one story, the founder of the Christian Orthodox Church is Andrea, the brother of Prince Marco. They say that Husrev Bey gave permission to build the church on the condition that it should be dug a few measures into the ground so as not to be taller than the surrounding mosques. There is another story, but you will remember the one you like best anyway. It says that the original church was destroyed during the Turkish conquest, and that the Sultan gave permission to build a new one on the condition that it should not be larger than the spread-out skin of an ox. It occurred to some wise old man to cut the ox's skin into thin strips, which made it possible to cover an area large enough for the church. In the middle of the 16th century, Jews exiled from Spain came to Sarajevo, finding their only refuge to be in the Ottoman Empire. The Jews settled in Velika Avlija, or Great Yard, where in 1581 the Rumelian Beglerbey Siyavush Pasha funded the building of a khan for them. For the next 325 years, until 1906, the Jews would pay a symbolic rent to him. In the Great Yard, the Great Temple was built. It was the first Jewish place of worship, or cortijo, or as the Jews called this building in their own language, ladino. It will remain in the records that in October of 1819, around 3,000 Muslims in Sarajevo, belonging to different castes and trades, revolted against the regent Mehmed Rushdie Pasha, forcibly freeing a number of unjustly arrested Sarajevan Jews. This day, the 4th of Marheshvan, was celebrated by the Jews of Sarajevo a long time afterward as a day of liberation for the respectable men. Almost a century before they were opened in Paris, the first cafes were opened in Sarajevo. The most famous cafes were the ones that were open in the morning. These were places where people gathered, where they talked, but most importantly, these were places where the best coffee was served. The conversation that went with it flowed easily and slowly. Even today, coffee here is drunk either with delight or not at all. The most famous cafes are Dariva, Babica Bashcha, and Shaban's Cafe, near which the public baths were built later. Let's return to the river and some other events surrounding it. The first great bridge after Benbasha is Sheher Chahayina Chupriya, or Sheheria. It was built in 1620 by the mayor, Sheher Chahaya, with the wish to be remembered by it. Unfortunately, very few people today remember his name. This is why we would like to mention his name, Hussein Hodzic. There is a story associated with this bridge about Mustafa, a servant of Musta Pasha Babic. He was, they say, very clumsy, though he liked to call himself unlucky. Once they played a prank on him by placing a sack of gold in the middle of a bridge that he would cross each day. Mustafa walked by the sack without even noticing it. When Musta Pasha asked him how he had crossed the bridge, Mustafa admitted that he had crossed the bridge with his eyes closed that morning because he wanted to see how a blind man crossed a bridge. He really was unlucky, concluded the Pasha himself. Sarajevo, as many cities of the Levant, was at that time divided into Çarşıya, the trading part of the city, and the distant peaceful residential areas, the mahallas. Mahallas were built on the surrounding slopes, rising from the center to the outskirts of the city. The mahallas were for living in, the Çarşıya for trading, and man was the measure of all things. The trading center of the city is Başçarşıya, where over 1,000 shops are located. The streets in the Çarşıya are named after trades and crafts: silk weavers, coppersmiths, cauldron makers, quilt makers, bookbinders, blacksmiths, tanners, merchants, restaurants. The streets in the residential areas of the city have some of the following names: Blossoms, Flower Street, Clove Street, Beneath the Cherry Tree, Wild Cherry Orchard, Seven Forests. The wealth of the interior of the houses did not consist of a lot of furniture, but of a variety of textiles, carpets, woodwork, gold and silver cutlery, silk mattresses, quilts embroidered with silver, brocade and satin pillows, ebony tables, large mirrors, and spacious rooms with specific arrangements. The part of town where the old way of building houses is best preserved is Ishakovic, with its steep, narrow streets in which the houses line up so that each has a view, and no single house blocks the view of another, because here people took care of their neighbors. Sarajevo is famous for the mutual care among neighbors and its marketplace solidarity, regardless of religion. A respectable Sarajevan, Avdaga Trampa, was selling his house at a price of 300 gold ducats. A buyer was surprised, but Avdaga explained to him that the house itself was worth 100 ducats, the neighbor to the left was worth 100 ducats, and the neighbor to the right another 100 ducats. Ishakovic is also known for its graveyard, where for the past 5 centuries both famous Sarajevans and those that had come from far away and met death in Sarajevo were buried. Surprised by the beauty of the view from that graveyard, the famous French architect Corbusier stated that of all the graveyards he had seen, the most beautiful one was Ishakovic's. The Muslim graveyards of Sarajevo are numerous, and they are strewn all over parts of the city, because the living liked to have the ones that had passed away close to them. They wanted the ones that had moved to the other world to be as close as possible to the world they had loved, the children they had given birth to, the window through which they had first seen the face and heard the voice of the one they had fallen in love with. Many of the thin upright gravestones have slanted over time, as if preparing to lie down into the graves alongside the dead. In 1878, by a decision of the Berlin Congress, Bosnia and Herzegovina falls under Austrian rule. The Bosnians responded to this decision with an armed rebellion that was crushed on 19 August 1878 when the Austrians marched into the city. 2 empires, the Ottoman that was leaving and the Austro-Hungarian that was arriving, seemed to be competing in the area surrounding Sheher Chahaya's bridge. The new ruler wanted to use the great buildings to show his superiority, because in a legal sense, Bosnia and Herzegovina was still a part of the Ottoman Empire. Alexander Vitek and Cyril Ivakovic created a project for the town hall, and its location was to be right next to the Charshia, or marketplace. But on that very spot lived a stubborn man who would not sell his land or his house. Negotiations, persuasions, and blackmail followed. "I will sell you the land for your building, but I won't sell the house. You will carry it, brick by brick, beam by beam, tile by tile, to the other riverbank." The authorities finally gave in and transported his house across the river Miljatska. The house has been called Inat Kucha, or House of Defiance, ever since. The town hall stands out, and it never quite fit in with the architecture of Bashcharchia, nor did it ever come to be liked by the local population. Once, across from the Tsar's Mosque, there stood the historic Isa-bey's Bridge. A replacement for this ancient bridge was built by another famous Sarajevan, Husrev-bey. It was a stone bridge with 4 arches that defied the weather until 1896. A year later, some 30 meters up the river, the first reinforced concrete bridge was built near the Tsar's Mosque, and it still stands today. Sarajevo was not neglected by catastrophes. We know about the great fires of 1644, 1697, and 1788. The things that had been built disappeared. The Austrian authorities showed some care for cultural heritage, and aside from placing some buildings in wrong locations, made no mistakes. They halted the construction of new buildings in the heart of the old part of town. This is why today it is possible to accurately distinguish between the two different parts of town. And while the authentic Bosnian style of building remained appropriate for its time, having adapted to the needs of both people and horses, and containing narrow streets, gardens, wells, and fountains, the streets of the Austrian era are wide and straight, and therefore convenient for other forms of transport. In 1884, 5 years after Siemens presented the electric tram at an exhibition in Berlin, it was being used in Sarajevo. Little was known about it, so fearing embarrassment, Austria decided to try it out in Sarajevo instead of Vienna. The tram was pulled along by horses, which were replaced by electrical power a year later. Time, like a river, flows on. For almost 200 years, Latinska Čuprija, or the Latin Bridge, stood in the same place. It was named after Latinluk, an area on the right bank where once was a colony of merchants and agents of trading companies from Dubrovnik. In this part of town, Sarajevan Catholics had a church which burned down in 1697. At the beginning of the 20th century, the first information panels started appearing in the city, slowly replacing the ancient craft of the tellal. A tellal was a man with a powerful voice who would move through the streets banging a drum and announcing important events, news, and orders of the authorities. The last tellal in Sarajevo was Haji Hafiz Machak. Sarajevo is a midway point, a crossroads of worlds. On June 28, 1914, Gavrilo Princip, in a terrorist act supervised and aided by Serbia, assassinates the Austro-Hungarian heir to the throne, Franz Ferdinand, and sparks a major conflict, World War I. For some time after the assassination, there was a monument on the bridge built by Austro-Hungarians for the assassinated Archduke. It was erected in 1917 on the 3rd anniversary of the assassination. The Latin Bridge, at which the assassination of the Austro-Hungarian heir to the throne took place, had been called Princip's Bridge until 1993. After 1918, Sarajevo gradually loses the characteristics of the administrative and political center of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The former shining capital is reduced to a provincial center of the Drina district. However, cultural, educational, and religious associations continue, and the city retains a relatively developed literary life. On the left bank of the Miljacka River, along the way from the Latin Bridge to the next bridge, where there was once a horse track, the music pavilion at Maidan flourished. It was a place for concerts, gatherings, and leisure activities. The pavilion burned down in 1941. In that same year, Sarajevo found itself under German occupation. In the period from 1941 until 1945, during the National Liberation War, the population of Sarajevo was decimated by the terror and genocide of the fascists. Apart from this, it suffered enormous material damages because the town of Sarajevo and its citizens were thoroughly plundered. On April 6, 1945, Sarajevo is liberated, and it again acquires the status of capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The hastened economic, demographic, and urban development of Sarajevo begins. In 1948, Sarajevo is inhabited by over 100,000 people. Sarajevo uncontrollably expanded from the destruction of the old city and the intensive building of the new one. An unfortunate decision was made to tear down the old marketplace. Bashcharchia managed to survive. However, in 1970, a plan for its improvement and reconstruction was made. On the site of today's Çamurya, or charcoal bridge, there once stood a wooden bridge. A metal bridge was built in 1886 from the metal poles used in the building of the Bosanski Brod-Zenica Railroad. It was named after the ashes of charcoal that the people who lived in its neighborhood used to throw off it. During the war in 1992, this bridge was an important part of a route leading to a place where one could get water. Unfortunately, the bridge was nearly destroyed, so on March 22, 1999, it was lifted by crane, cut into pieces, and disposed of in a junkyard. The city authorities are planning to build a new larger bridge, which will retain only the name Çamurya from the old one. Practically all of the people who were born in Sarajevo have special emotional ties to the bridge Drvenia, or wooden bridge. This was the inevitable spot for first dates. On one side sat the girls' high school, on the other side, the boys' high school, which today is called the First High School and is famous in part for having educated two Nobel Prize winners, Ivo Andrić and Vladimir Prelog. When speaking about bridges, we must not leave out the name Abdullah Çelebi Muzafferia. This man, unknown in Sarajevo today, was the famous inventor and constructor of pontoon bridges in the 18th century. He was buried at the Natkovaci graveyard in 1750. Long ago, in 1557, Çoban Hasan's area was established on the left bank of the Miljacka River. In this place stood a wooden bridge, Çobanya, which was replaced in 1888 with today's metal bridge. This is also the bridge with the most names: Shepherd's Bridge, Masaryk's Bridge, Post Office Bridge, Theater Bridge, the bridge by the two fishermen, and a long time ago people used to call it jokingly Shaitania, Devil's Bridge. In 1897, the National Theater was constructed. It was known at the time as a social hall, and it was designed by Carlo Parjic. Two bridges stand next to each other. They are both called Skandaria, though one bears the attribute old and the other one new. Someone started a rumor that the so-called old one was made of the same material as the Eiffel Tower, and today some still call it the Eiffel Bridge. Between the 15th and the 16th centuries, the Bosnian Sanjak Bey, Skender Pasha, had a wooden bridge built that survived and served the city for almost 4 centuries. His son, Mustafa Bey, built a mosque in 1518. Time finally took its toll on the mosque, which survived 400 years. Its stone minaret survived until 1960, when the construction of the great sports center of Skandaria was begun. Special attention was given to the ideal of body hygiene. It is, therefore, not a surprising fact that the first hammam, or Turkish bath, was built by Isa-bey Ishakovic, the founder of Sarajevo, right next to the Tsar's mosque. Sarajevo was also famous for a large number of fountains that supplied the city with water and made it more beautiful. Fountains were always built as religious endowments of certain individuals. They were made of stone and fit harmoniously into the surrounding residential areas. They were constructed with one thought in mind: it is a good deed to feed the hungry and give drink to the thirsty. Sarajevo already had a running water system by the middle of the 15th century. Few other European cities could boast of such an achievement at that time. A poor man lived in an area near the mosque of Hasan Buzagic. He was so poor that he could not afford to buy his wife a new traditional garment with a veil that she wanted. When he finally saved up enough money, he told his wife about it, but she was not pleased with the prospect of the gift. She said to him, "Our street does not have a fountain, so use that money to build one, and we'll buy the garment when we have saved up more money." This is how the fountain came to be known as Ferrajusha, or Garment with Veil Fountain. The custom of building benefactor city fountains, or sebils, as they are called in Islamic tradition, is 13 centuries old. Today's sebil in Başçarşıya is a building of just this kind. The well-known chronicler of Sarajevo, Mullah Mustafa Başeskiya, claims that there were once over 100 of them in Sarajevo, and that they were built out of love for the martyrs of Kerbela. All of them were burned down in the Great Fire of 1697. At the beginning of the 17th century, the population of Sarajevo was made up almost completely of Muslims, but it has not always been this way, nor will it always be this way. Here, on the dividing line of the Eastern and the Western Roman Empire, the Romans never managed to Romanize the natives, the Illyrians. The Slavs managed to impose their language and culture on the natives in the period between the 6th and the 11th centuries. In the period from the 11th to the 15th centuries, a multi-religious state was formed. It is remembered today by the fact that it has never belonged to anyone but itself. It is not surprising that these Bosnian people, who were their own masters, built a mosque, a Catholic church, and a Christian Orthodox church, as well as a synagogue in the city center within a parameter of only 200 meters. It is not surprising that manuscripts and books were written in their own language, in the Latinic, Cyrillic, and Bosančica or Bosnian alphabet, as well as the Arabic alphabet. It is also no surprise that one of the oldest Jewish books, the Haggadah, was preserved. And the fortifying walls and gates of Vratnik that still can be seen today were built in 1697, only after Eugen Savoysky burned down the city. The citizens decided to protect themselves by building fortified walls that would be an hour's walk long, a 2 hours walk wide, and 10 measures tall. Sarajevo defended itself on these walls only twice. The first time in 1878 against the Austrians, courageously but unsuccessfully, and the second time from 1992 to 1995, again heroically, but this time successfully. After World War II and the heroic struggle against fascism in Yugoslavia, which was fought most intensively in Bosnia, the development of the city of Sarajevo becomes apparent. The Austro-Hungarian Empire built up the city in a period of 4 decades, as much as the Ottoman Empire had in a period of 4 centuries. From 1945 until today, the city expanded to 5 times its size in 1945. In 1899, August Braun, the owner of a brickyard, dedicated a building to his wife Maria, and this part of town became known as Marenvor, or Maria's Castle. Before he met his wife, August Braun had been producing bricks with his first and last name imprinted on them. After meeting Maria, his bricks were marked with a small heart that had the initials AB within it. Since he was the greatest producer of bricks, most buildings were made of bricks with hearts imprinted on them. Such a building is the Government Palace, today's Presidency Building, as well as the administrative building of the railroad in which the Ministry of Foreign Affairs also is situated. Sarajevans love their city. When the 14th Winter Olympics were held in Sarajevo in 1984, the citizens spent millions of hours involved in voluntary activities, donating their own money with the hope of making the Olympics memorable around the world and having the Sarajevan spirit spread throughout it. Sarajevo has its past and the ones who know about it. It has its stories and their listeners. It has its roads and their travelers. It has its oppressors and their victims. On April 5, 1992, the attack on the capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina began. Sarajevo came to a halt, bewildered at the sight of utter hell. Again, everything revolves around the bridges. The siege of Sarajevo, which defied nature and justice, began on the Verbanja Bridge and the Bridge of Brotherhood and Unity. Everything resembled a medieval siege. The forces of the Yugoslav army and local terrorists placed 260 tanks, 120 grenade launchers, and an enormous number of other weapons of smaller caliber on the mountain and hillsides around Sarajevo. They shoot at the city, sometimes even blindfolded, but they always hit something. Sarajevo is the target. Sarajevo is without food, water, electricity. Important buildings, libraries, archives disappear. Days, months, years go by. The suffering, the affliction, and the number of victims keeps increasing. Sarajevo is a concentration camp, but it keeps on living. Sarajevans are forced under complete siege to dig a narrow tunnel 740 meters long under the airport runway. This was an important and the only link Sarajevo had with other parts of Bosnia and Herzegovina. For the first time in history, the world watches genocide and the brutal destruction of a city on live TV. Nobody even wonders anymore when the end will come. Those that have defended the city and survived its hell rarely like to talk about it. They say it doesn't matter because nobody can understand it anyway. During the siege of Sarajevo, which lasted 1,417 days, Serb aggressors killed 10,514 civilians, of which 1,598 were children. On 19 December 1995, the Dayton Peace Accords were signed, and the war in Bosnia was brought to an end. Sarajevo is once again free and quickly recovers from the war with the help of the international community and friends. This is an opportunity to remember the verses of a Sarajevo poet from the 18th century, Meli, who in a song to Sarajevo says, "May the Lord protect it from all evils, may every enemy of Sarajevo be destroyed, if there should ever be one." Sarajevo has for a long time been condemned to the future.